From Rome to California. When empires import their undoing, in California, BLM barricades, anti-ICE riots, secession talk, and a demographic shift decades in the making. Are these just headlines of political theatre, or have we seen this whole circus before? Let's set the scene. California, the 2020s. We've seen the footage, protests that look more like street-level battles. ICE facilities are surrounded like enemy forts. Downtowns are flooded with masked demonstrators waving the flags of other nations. Then there's Trump, threatening to withhold federal funds from the state. Everything from disaster relief to education money. Governor Gavin Newsom's response? Maybe California should stop paying federal taxes. That's not just a spicy political theatre, it's the same rhetorical line you get right before relationships break down, divorce court, national edition. And Newsom wasn't alone. After Trump's election, there was a real push for Calexit. Prominent Californians called for secession, arguing that their values and demographics had diverged too far from the rest of the country. For a moment, it didn't feel like a joke, it felt like a prelude. But here's the question. Is all of this just political theatre, or is it the outward expression of something more profound? To answer that, let's dig back to ancient Rome. In 1916, a classicist named Tenny Frank did something unusual. He read thousands of gravestones. These weren't famous epitaphs of emperors or generals, they were ordinary inscriptions buried in the necropolises of Rome. He found surprising results. A steady decline in Latin names, and a sharp rise in Greek, Syrian and other foreign origin names. By the 2nd and 3rd centuries AD, most people buried in the Eternal City weren't Roman by birth or heritage. The implication was profound. The original Roman population, the one that had built the Republic, marched with Caesar and debated in the Senate, was declining fast. It was often replaced by formerly enslaved people, provincial migrants and newcomers drawn by the wealth of the capital. Many native Romans could afford to leave for the Eastern Empire, seeking stability in Constantinople or other thriving Greek-speaking cities. Sound familiar? Rome's economic model, import labor, export stability. Here's the core issue Tenny Frank was getting at. Rome had become dependent on imported labor. Cheap, expendable and voiceless. That labor didn't integrate overnight, and more importantly, it didn't fix Rome's broken economy. Instead, it masked the cracks until it was too late, and the system collapsed when the stress fractures became visible. Barbarian invasions, internal rebellions, plagues. Not because of the immigrants, not because of the laborers. The elite class built a society that only worked if it could keep importing more people to do the hard work while eroding the foundations of civic participation, family structure, and long-term investment. California, a mirror in the dust. Back to modern California. Over the last century, California went from being 95% white to a majority-minority state, with whites now making up just 20% of public school students. What are the most significant demographic drivers? Immigration and the use of cheap labor, mainly from Latin America and Asia. Just like Rome, this wasn't necessarily malicious. It was a market solution. American families wanted strawberries, construction, childcare and cleaning services at prices that didn't match American wages. Businesses and politicians complied. A new underclass was created with limited legal protections but crucial economic function. And just like in Rome, the original population, especially working-class whites, began leaving. The Californian exodus isn't just a tax revolt, it's a cultural one. Many who feel they no longer recognize where they grew up are moving to Texas, Idaho or Florida, just as patricians once fled to the Eastern Empire. More importantly, the ones who are leaving have children, and let us be blunt, the retirees left won't last much longer. Again, not because of the immigrants, but because the system built around them stopped working for anyone. When protests look like border skirmishes. The BLM protests and anti-ICE riots weren't just about race, they were about frustration over a system that feels hollowed out. A system that imports labor, exports capital and hoards opportunity at the top. When the people at the bottom feel trapped and the people in the middle feel replaced, that tension explodes into the streets. California today has the GDP of a G7 nation, but once you factor in the cost of living, it also has some of the highest poverty rates in the country. Homelessness, it's worse than in many South American countries. Multi-generational housing isn't just standard anymore. It's become the default for survival. The wealth gap is out of control, and the political class seems more focused on performative virtue than fixing anything at the core. It's a recipe for instability. If you're white and don't want to raise your kids alongside your parents and grandparents under the same roof, chances are you can't afford to stay. So, you leave. So what now? Here's the harsh truth. The demographic shift has already happened. California is the new model, and whether you see that as a promise or a warning depends on how prepared we are to adapt. Because here's what history teaches us. You can't reverse time. Rome didn't get its old population back. California isn't going to go back to 1950. What matters now is what comes next. We can blame immigrants, but that would be punching down. They were pulled in by an economic machine needing more bodies than citizens. If there's blame to assign, it belongs to the architects of that system, those who profited while letting the foundation crack. Instead, we should ask, how do we build a sustainable future for everyone here? How do we stabilize, not segregate? How do we ensure that the children of these new Californians have a stake in the state's future, one that doesn't look like a replay of Rome's slow-motion collapse? Because unlike Rome, we have the benefit of hindsight. The protests, the secession talk, the demographic inversion, none of these are isolated. They're chapters in a story that stretches back centuries, about what happens when empires outsource the hard stuff and neglect the human cost. It's not too late to change how the story ends, but it's too late to pretend we're still at the beginning. California and the US as a whole are deep into a significant transition. The old system, that's done. We're not bringing it back. But what comes next, whether it's better or worse, is still up to us. We've got some say in how this chapter plays out. If that made you feel uncomfortable, that was the point. Remember to like, subscribe, and tell us what you think.